Happy holidays, everyone. We're almost there. Hopefully, you had a terrific year, and it's certainly going to be an exciting one going forward. Just confirming, Neil, am I presenting the correct screen? Everything looks good?
Looks good to me.
Fantastic. Well, let's just jump right in. We have, thank you as always for joining us. We have just a pretty simple agenda. We've only got two items to talk about. We're going to talk about strategy drivers, and we're going to talk about what we think might happen as we move ahead into 2024 and beyond. So Neil and I will do this together. So Neil will kick us off with the strategy drivers and sort of why do we manage travel at all? Neil, take it away.
Thank you. Well, is that a question? Why we manage travel? And I think that is a question that's being asked, and we have to take a little step back and figure what are the pressures that we're feeling in those of us who run managed travel programs at the moment, which is pretty much all of us here, right? So, can we go back to that? There we go. Thank you. Well, so what are we seeing and why are we asking this question? We're asking this question because first and foremost, I think that the primary reason that we ever started managing travel was cost back in the day when Will and I were much younger and had hair or different colored hair. And we are seeing that some of those value benefits have been diminished or thinned out over time. Probably it would be fair to say that the first airline deal I ever signed, I would jump at the chance. Any buyer would jump at the chance of having that kind of deal in place right now. And I think over the last 20 years, we've just seen those diminish and diminish and diminish. At the same time, we've had the movement of travel being housed more and more, working in partnership with procurement, which we know, among other things, fair to say, has a strong cost focus. And then, of course, we've got NDC coming into the mix and other kind of pressures going on. So let's step back and ask ourselves the question, why do we manage travel? Well, of course, cost management is still there as a driver, should be, perhaps just less important. But cost management has two aspects to it. It's not just the savings that we can get through the supplier agreements. It's also demand management as well and controlling maybe the advanced purchase period or the class of service. So that's the first thing that is still there. So Will and I sat down, put our heads together, and we came up with these other strategic drivers. So that the goal here was to find that the reasons that we would manage travel, and each of these reasons should stand on their own. Maybe sustainability, or the topics that we come up here: regulatory compliance, traveler satisfaction, duty of care, process efficiency. Each one of those could stand on its own, and then it becomes a strategic driver. So we've seen more recently in times that sustainability, we need a travel program in order to support the company's sustainability goals, and we'll be touching on that a little bit later. So we need the travel program not only needs to report on the scope 3 emissions, also needs to do something about reducing that carbon footprint. So identifying how much it is, and then identifying the solutions, reducing it or offsetting that. Sustainability in the wider sense also includes our DEI initiatives as well. Regulatory compliance, that in some instances is a reason for managing travel. You might work in an industry, and there are some out there. For example, life sciences industries, we know there's strong regulatory guardrails about travel and meetings that need to be observed, financial institutions as well. So we do some things in travel which we need to make sure that we're continually staying on the right side of the law or regulation. That could be from an accounting or tax purposes, how we put the right expenses into the right cost center. We've seen gamification rise as over the last 10 years as something to incentivize. Do all the things that we do to incentivize compliance, are all the things that we do in gamification necessarily right from a tax perspective, or do we need to consider a tax perspective in gamification when we're returning money to employees, right? Rebilling is something that happened. We saw that 20 years ago. Some rebilling caused some issues in some companies. We also always see the travel policy linked to the ethics policy as well. We're seeing that data security and protection, GDPR, is becoming a very, very top of mind subject for travelers as well. So therefore, maybe a reason to have a traveler program so that when our employees are required to travel, the company has the responsibility to make sure that their data, personal information is going to be protected. So regulatory compliance as a reason on its own for managing travel, let's consider that. Traveler satisfaction as well. We were talking, Will's going to talk a lot more about that, but traveler satisfaction, we'll be talking about our mileage survey and results. Duty of care, we know, has been a reason for managing travel on its own, knowing where our people are, but also educating them, preparing them for trips, and being able to respond in the case of emergencies. And then again, from our mileage survey as well, we saw that a key point for travelers, and one most easily addressed from a return on investment perspective, was travelers were very concerned about what was happening on the back end, right? Making the processes very, very efficient. So faster you can make and the easier you can make the expense report or the payment process, the more that the traveler satisfaction you're going to get. And if not, that can generate a large amount of internal costs. So managing the whole process, which also impacts traveler satisfaction, again, that is something that we would consider to be a strategic driver. Put those all together, and you'll find throughout the organization that there are numerous stakeholders, partners that you will have inside the company who will more clearly represent these particular areas. And partnering those and setting up a governance committee will then position travel as a service to those partners internal to the organization. And then maybe with a side benefit, we're hearing clients say, some of our clients and buyers say, well, we've now got additional budget from whether it's corporate security or whether it's legal or whether it's HR, to fund some of the things that we want to do in travel management to support those objectives. So sitting back, designing a governance system, but identifying these particular strategic drivers in your company and how important each one is and who's responsible for that, who's your partner. We think that's a way forward that our buyers are going to be doing a lot more of in the coming years. Will.
Thank you, Neil. And the purpose of sharing that is that's the foundational support for everything that we're going to look for as 2024 and subsequent years progress with the evolution and innovation of travel management. So it's very helpful, we think, to look back at sort of the pillars that we're building off of. But with that being said, let's look ahead at what we might see in 2024 and beyond. So hopefully you guys can see the screen okay, because we want to go through each one of these technologies. We have about an hour on each one that you see on the screen. So looking forward to having you with us for the whole week. Of course, I'm kidding. Most of you have already laughed, but some of you had just a moment of panic. But the purpose in showing you this is we are in a tech-driven industry, as many are, but you can see the proliferation of new providers and new technologies and how things are changing so rapidly. As an example of speed of change, maybe you guys have seen this before, maybe you haven't, but it's a good benchmark on how we are progressing at the speed of innovation. So the next few bullets are the time it took to get to 100 million users. So Netflix took about 10 years to get there. Gmail was about 5 years. So you can see we're picking up in speed. Twitter or X is about 5 years, Facebook 4.5, WhatsApp 3.5. You saw Instagram in about 2.5. Now we talk about things like TikTok, 9 months, ChatGPT, 2 months. And my personal favorite, Pirate Bay, which was 1 day after Netflix canceled share passwords and Gen Z discovered torrents. So we had 100 million users in 1 day. So that is the speed of change, and that's the speed of evolution that we're all working towards. So as Goldspring put together ideas on where we might go, we thought these 10 trends were the most impactful as we look forward to the next year and then ongoing from there. So we thought we might just take them one by one. So we'll start off with our AI idea. So AI is definitely here, but it's in its infancy. And each of these slides, you'll see we're presenting some challenges and we're presenting some solutions or some activities. The first challenge that's maybe not as well known about AI is labeling or tokenization. So the concept here is that you need to understand what picture you're looking at. An example that was given at GBTA's convention by one of the presenters was an elbow and a knee. Now, a human can understand that very easily, but if they look similar enough, AI needs to be told one is an elbow and one is a knee. And then it needs to tokenize that and make it contextual to what you might be asking for. So not an elbow of macaroni, but an elbow of a human. So that's what we mean of some of the challenges. And it's estimated that there are 1 million people today tokenizing or labeling AI images today to build it up. So it's very infant in its ability to comprehend textual, contextual pictures and messaging. The second challenge is lack of transparency. It's not well understood how AI in deep learning models come to its decisions. So the opaqueness kind of obscures the decision-making process and therefore the underlying logic. And generally speaking, when people can't comprehend how something gets to its conclusions, it can often build distrust and some resistance to adoption of new technologies. So that's an ever improving point, but lack of transparency is another challenge. This next challenge is hallucinations. And maybe you've heard of these, but it's AI sort of creating things that aren't factual. And the example I'll share with you is when I went in and said, who starred in the Indiana Jones movies? AI came back, generative AI came back and said that was Harrison Ford. And I said, no, I don't think so. And it said, yes, it was Harrison Ford. I said, no, I really don't think it was. It said, you're correct. It was Brad Pitt. So it changed the star of that based on my pushback. So you get some hallucinations in the data, which obviously makes it a little difficult to jump in with both feet and trust. So what are some of our applications related to travel that we might see going forward? Well, one of the great experiences we got to do this year was facilitate roundtables at GBTA's convention. And the two roundtables I facilitated were on AI. And so we had about 90 buyers rotate through those tables. And the number one element that they shared they're having success is in the expense reporting tool. And as Neil alluded to, our Smileage work showed that this is a great area of concern and difficulty and pain and can really increase the traveler experience by taking away some of those pain points. So AI, for example, can look beyond just the approval and approval routing mechanisms. If enough of the markers are completely in line with accepted practice, AI can give the okay to shortcut the approval process that might normally be in place because so many of the positive markers are in place. The second is looking for duplicative or mistakes in expenses. An example might be you go to dinner with 6 people and you pay for that dinner. So you list those 6 people. It might check those other 6 expense reports and make sure that those weren't also claimed for dinner or they did reference they had dinner. Can be looking for omissions, errors of omission, or errors of commission, meaning intentional, and look through those. So it can offer some not only service improvements, but exceptional auditing capability as well. Airports are getting into AI usage as well to manage traffic flow. So imagine AI is very, very quickly and easily able to reroute security, customs, even information in the waiting areas, depending upon ever-changing arrivals, departure, weather, and so on. Could also advise travelers with suggested tips. For example, if you're looking for something to eat, this particular set of gates has a low usage right now. So you might be able to get in and out of a meal faster in those particular places. Meetings is an area of just absolute revolutionizing. Meeting planners are able to virtually look at spaces through virtual reality and augmented reality and say, set it for 500, set the room for 800, show me the room set for a stage versus a theater versus a roundtable approach. Where would we put food and catering? How does AV work? All of that can be done through AI and through a augmented virtual reality without the meeting planner having to travel. Same kind of thing for setups for foyer events and so on. TMC chat is obviously going to be revolutionized by this. The TMCs, as we're going to talk about, continue to struggle with some labor issues. And as a result, they're looking to take transactions that are historically low value and improve those. So find a way to automate those and serve those transactions with immediacy, but also at pennies rather than dollars on the transaction. The challenge remains, where do we hand over to humans? Where does You've all been, if you just take a moment, I know this will remind you of the pain you've been in a phone loop. Press one for this, press two for this. I didn't understand that answer. Gets very frustrating quickly. And TMCs also understand that that will happen in chat. So it's a very precarious ledge from which we move from AI integration over to humans to help. And lastly, potentially, the end of search via the booking tool. So just imagine AI is parsing your chats, your texts, and your emails. And for those of you with privacy concerns, let's assume you've opted in, but it's seeing all those, and it sees Neil and I are having a combination of texting, chatting, and emails that come in that all seem to indicate I need to be in New York on Wednesday for a 9 a.m. Meeting. If that was the case, AI would also know my personal preferences along with my corporate preferences, whether I prefer to fly on overnights because I like to maximize family time, or I prefer not to fly overnights because I prefer a good night's rest before an important meeting. But it would know that. It also knows how far I live from the airports in both places. It knows perhaps in New York I don't like to rent a car. It also knows where the meeting location is and can match. So while all of this texting and chatting and emailing is going on, all of a sudden I get a pop-up that says, Mr. Tate, here's a suggested itinerary for what looks like your trip to New York City on Wednesday based on your preferences, company policies. Click here to book. And it's that simple. The search is done, and obviously AI overlays that. So as I change things, it learns that I don't have that preference for these reasons, and perhaps it just delivers for me an automated suggested itinerary that does encompass all of my contextualization and personalization. That's one possibility. There are some fun AI applications too. So, we couldn't present a Gold Spring without a smile or two. So on the left, you see what's called Deep Beat, and that's a rap lyric writer. So if you're an aspiring rapper and you're very interested, this is a great place you could get a little help. Deep Nostalgia is the middle one, which is animating old family photos. And you might have seen this, and it might be a little creepy to see grandmom talking or moving her head or looking around the picture, but it's pretty interesting. Boom is your choice of any type of trivia quiz. So if your favorite thing is Star Trek, the original series, you can have a trivia quiz built on that, something like that. The Freddie meter, very near and dear to my musical partner, Neil, who loves music and all things music. You can sing along, and it will allow you to see how close you're matching sort of Freddie on a percentage. And it was developed as an AIDS charity by Queen, the group, Freddie Mercury's group. So it's very interesting and fully supported. And lastly would be AI Dungeon, which allows you to create your own story. So you put the story elements. You prefer these 10 things to happen in a story, it'll write it for you. So those are just some fun ones to look at. Our next kind of developing area that we think is really going to be impactful next year will be ubiquitous profiles. And this has been a challenge for a long, long time in our space. We have a profile with our hotelier. We have a profile with our air supplier. We have a profile with our booking tool. Perhaps it's synced, and it's also the same profile we have with our travel management company, perhaps. And then we might use third-party booking tools, and we might have profiles with them. And on it goes with ground transportation providers and so on. Even if you happen to use a system of restaurant reservations, it'll have a profile. All of that. That means it's different by supplier. So there isn't connectivity inside of those, and each might carry a little bit of different information. and they might have unequal levels of priority. So, as an example, your organization, the profile you have for booking with your company, might have a different priority than you do when you book personally in your third party application. Well, perhaps you want a little bit of more compatibility with that. But all of these differences in priorities and supplier create a lot of complexity, and it creates a fragmented environment. So, what do we see? Some of the challenges and now the applications as we go forward. If you were to create a ubiquitous profile, and we do think the market will move to this, you'll always be current because whatever you're updating, and if we assume blockchain is the distributed ledger, once it's updated on the chain, it's updated for everyone. So everyone would have the ability to see and look through that. In addition to being current, we'll have traveler and supplier efficiency. For example, you don't have to call your supplier with something that wasn't in your profile. Or if you don't have a notes ability to add in the contextual reservation, then you could add a note, but you wouldn't need to do that. So suppliers will get you the kind of pillow you prefer at your hotel. They will get you a room that's more near the elevator than it is the opposite end of the hall, a lower floor. If you're claustrophobic, perhaps a ground floor so you don't have to enter an elevator at all. In addition to this, you can greater personalize all of those needs and abilities as you travel to create a better experience. But that personalization might differ and might be applicable by supplier. It could be by trip or it could be by recommendation. So, for an example, when you stay at a certain property, you always like this type of room. However, when you fly, you prefer this type of seat. And when you rent, you prefer an EV over some other kind of automobile or ground transportation. And then the same with recommendations. Perhaps you're really interested in the local food scene and you'd like to know where is the local food scene, therefore, where are properties that are somewhat convenient to that, but also convenient to my meeting. So, contextualization of all of these profile applications can really be a nice enhancement. Neil, if you would, talk to us about sustainability and sort of what's happening in the marketplace with challenges and with application.
Will do, Will. Thank you very much. And thanks for the comments back from George on the managed travel drivers. Again, just to touch back on that, there should be no question why we manage travel. We think so. Do all companies think so? But by socializing more those drivers, we believe will firm up the reason and put that under an appropriate governance structure. So sustainability, what we're hearing through all the industry events that Will and I attend to when we have roundtables, hot topic sections on sustainabilities, we're still hearing a lot of questions from buyers about how to address the subject. And that's very, very key because we'll find out later on there's maybe a difference in approach to this or difference in the sentiment from the buyers out there and the travelers themselves. But we do have different measurements out there and different things that apply to different categories. When we look at air, well, guess what? There is an ISO standard for measuring carbon footprint. There's the DEFRA method, but there are also 2 or 3 other methods that are being developed and new ones appearing all the time. And buyers are wanting to know which ones am I going to use, which one does my TMC use or online booking tool use. So that's something that needs to be recognized. Of course, when we go into the hotel area, we're seeing more and more reporting on the hotel side. But again, you can imagine that for every single individual property out there, we don't have precise data. So perhaps a lot of assumptions and defaults being used on the measurements that are provided for energy, not just carbon, it's carbon, energy, it's waste, and it's water. And then, of course, the other major issue we have with the hotel category is, of course, leakage. And then there's the what to do about it, the different contribution choices that a company will have. So talk about Smileage and we did our survey, and one of the things that came back as a traveler hot point is they do want sustainable options. One of the great things about the survey that Will did was it looked at the difference on what the travelers want and what the buyers what resonated with the buyers too as well. And They were aligned in a lot of places, but there were some gaps. One of the largest gaps was on sustainability. The travelers have a real thirst for the information at point of sale and to be guided on what to do. And I think when we've socialized this with some of the buyer groups, the buyers are saying, yes, I do have the same interest, but until I know exactly what we're doing and how to apply those drivers and to apply the information that we've got, I'm still a little lost. So it kind of lost importance a little bit, was the explanation that we've heard back from some of those buyer groups. So I think there's a thirst out there to know that, and certainly you'll find it resonates very, very highly with the travelers. So contribution choices, this is something that we are beginning to see. Had the opportunity to manage a round table with some buyers, particularly from Europe, earlier this year. Began to hear more and more the term lowest logical carbon fare, right? Which is going to something, another four-letter abbreviation, or just LLC, if you like, lowest logical carbon, another three-letter abbreviation that's going to enter our lexicon. And that's instead of our lowest logical fare, which could be taken away by NDC. We'll get to that in a second, right? Lowest logical carbon. And that's the way that some companies are presenting the air options to their travelers as well. And then some interesting ideas on the contribution choices as well, which again is a question that we're hearing. How do we provide these offsets? And all that, of course, is predicated that we have good data management. But are we going to be doing this at a point of sale level where we can purchase those offsets at the time of point of sale? Or again, we have seen other companies have some very, very aggressive carbon reduction targets. And we've seen some of those companies in Europe looking at 50, 70% targets with carbon budgets applied, which basically, as we can probably understand, means less travel. So sustainability, we expect that to the momentum to continue to build on sustainability. Let's talk a little bit about NDC. And this, of course, is a wonderful topic. I think we've all, every event that we've been to in the industry, we've talked about NDC. Really, what are we seeing? We're seeing that, yes, there are differences in the fares that the buyers and our travelers are seeing. We may have seen this 20 years ago, but really that was more solved by technology. It was kind of, we were made aware of the problem, but the full content generally was there and has been there. Now we know that that full content is not there as well. We're knowing that behind the scenes, some of the airlines are passing some of the costs on through from different distribution channels back to the TMCs and back through the value chain. And those, of course, are being passed on to the traveler. So we're going to get used to paying different fees depending on the source or the channel that the content came through. And then we're hearing about other kinds of pricing, dynamic pricing, which is creating the offer at the moment that the request comes through, and also continuous pricing. Our 26-letter alphabet apparently wasn't enough for the airlines, and they want to fill in all those intermediate price points. All of these, of course, and those are not enabled through the EDIFACT system. Those continuous pricing has to be enabled through the NDC channel as well. So we're seeing all those. The main point here, and we have to accept that, is that the airlines model now pretty much is that they want to be dialoguing with the end traveler, with the customer, right? And the main problem with the EDIFACT system is that the GDS, the value chain, was creating the offer, and the airline was shielding that. They didn't shield it from that. They didn't know who was asking for a particular fare or doing a particular search. So with the NDC channel, the primary difference that we should remember is that the offer creation is happening the airline side, and they will know who is offering, and you will see different offers tailored to different travelers. So what's going to happen in 2024? Airlines and suppliers essentially fund the whole value chain top to bottom. And so when those funds are diminished, and when the budgets are tightened and what the airlines are pumping into the value chain, I would say transaction fees will necessarily rise for the buyer. We will see airlines continue to tier discounts by the channel that they're offering various content through. We will see blockchain come in as a disruptor, although we largely feel that it's going to be a disruptor in the future on the payment side. And that's something that could be very interesting for our new travel management processes, right? And of course, we're going to see and different distributor models on how content is aggregated in the future. Is it done in the GDS NDC side? Is it done at the booking tool level? Is it done through a consolidator level? And that's something that we're going to have to take a very serious look on as we design our programs and platforms for the future. So NDC is going to be the hot topic for 2024, continue to be the hot topic. Will.
Thank you, Neil. I love that it's new distribution capability, NDC, and it's 10 and a half or 11 years old.
It
But
is.
I guess we can call it old distribution. I don't know. Anyway, we'll let the industry handle that one. We'll just focus on the traveler experience, and it does remain absolutely vital. So, a couple of the challenges that exist in our space, we continually have pressure from leisure applications, and that's because largely the venture capital money and a lot of the startups happen on the leisure space because you don't have all the rules and guardrails of travel policies and preferred suppliers and things like that. So when a traveler experiences a leisure product, it tends to be wide open and tends to have a lot of flexibility and fluidity to it. So they experience that, then they come over to the corporate side and say, wow, this is not a good experience. So there's continual pressure and dissonance between leisure expectations and corporate. The next is during the great pause, as I heard it called recently. So we will adopt that instead of a pandemic or any other words. We'll call it the great pause. That's my new favorite. Thank you, New York City BTA, for sharing that with me. Travel became deprioritized, and we did it because of safety and security. Remember, this wasn't just an idea of let's travel well, it was people may die. I'm worried about catching something that could infect me, my family, my loved ones, elderly, young children, whatever. But we were concerned about life and death. And when something like that happened, we put a command and a control function over the top of the traveler experience. So we didn't really care that much about your experience. We cared about keeping you alive. And so with that focus, we said travel is not as important. So we pause travel, and then we start to come back and travel. And many organizations looked at the bottom line and said, wait a minute, sales were equivalent. We spent half as much on travel. How much does that actually contribute? So the question of the priority of travel and the return on investment for travel became more and more in question. But we do have a few applications, and we've listed a couple here. We'll start with what the buyers must do. There's two things. They have to rebuild the traveler's trust. And with what Neil just shared about NDC and travelers not really understanding what NDC is, but they do understand that somehow they see a fare that is 30% less expensive in the airline's website than it might have been through the company channel, they start to wonder. So there's going to be a trust erosion that we have to continue to work towards and firm up. And then, of course, to create this experience and have it remain vital, we have to innovate for stickiness. We have to create a better mousetrap. We have to build a system that travelers say, why would I go elsewhere of all the value I get? So some of those things can be very simple, like they take great care of me. I booked it one time out of channel on my own, and my whole time was 5 hours to try to get some change made to a carrier or something else. So they give me great service. Or we start to innovate and we add in additional personalization and contextualization. Hey, Will, because you booked with us and we know what property you're staying at and you shared you like hiking, there are two great hikes that were very close to your property that you may want to consider. If I go outside channel, maybe that recommendation doesn't come to me. Or if I keep it just within the experience itself, Will, 87 of our travelers stayed at the same hotel you mentioned, and here were a few of their tips. And it gives me some ideas. The restaurant's really good, or the restaurant is not as good. You might want to walk a block down to a local place. But I couldn't get that if I wasn't in channel. So we have to innovate for stickiness. And if buyers don't want to do that, instead of the carrot approach, they can certainly move to the stick. they could change policy and start to say, you've got to book within the channel or we won't reimburse you. And that's a hard line that most organizations don't want to take. But again, as we see dissonance and pressure between leisure and corporate systems, we have to build a way to keep them in channel. Or the other piece may simply be, okay, we won't reimburse. It's not that we'll reimburse you, we'll limit you. So, as an example, some organizations say, in following the example I was giving earlier, Will, you're going to New York City and you live in the Dallas area. Therefore, for 2.5 days of a trip, we would expect your budget to be $1,800. We'll simply reimburse you for $1,800. So you can choose your airline, you can choose your hotel, you can choose what meals you include with your hotel if you stay in a one that includes breakfast, or you can stay in an upscale one, or you can eat a really nice meal and pay the difference. That's fine with us, but we're going to limit you on a per diem basis. So we might see that kind of happen more and more. Personalization will continue to dominate what we're seeing in the future. We've given you a few examples, but one of the challenges with personalization is, who is the customer? Neil had shared that there's this call and response that is happening within airline pricing. So at the moment, the call and response is based on your travel agency, pseudo city, your ARC number, your IATA number, or your corporate contract. That's fine. We understand who is calling. And so the response is tailored to those as customers. But when it's personally will take calling with a certain frequent number, a status number, a hotel number, whatever, then the personalization starts to go to Will's preference. And how will that be prioritized compared to the company preference? So the company preference is I go on a certain carrier. But because my ID says I'm an individual, maybe I'll get an offer that says we haven't seen you on our planes in quite a long time. Therefore, we'd like to double your frequent points if you'll fly with us this time. Well, perhaps the reason I haven't flown is it's not in policy, but perhaps I get the offer. So, how do I prioritize and how does personalization account for the corporate desires compared to the personal? Easy when they overlap, not as easy when they conflict. And again, we're going to see this happen in leisure apps more quickly than corporate. So, you're going to have that pressure and that tension. However, some great applications, as you can already surmise, a better travel experience if it gets personalized. I gave the example of perhaps a overnight or a red eye type flight is preferred in one case, maybe not preferred in the other. So maybe it's preferred for midweek, but not for Monday, Sunday, or Friday trips. Also, I can incorporate these personalizations into the preferred channel and therefore build a better mousetrap. I can become more innovative and more customized. And then lastly, I could connect this personalization with new and different technologies. We've already seen in the marketplace a very, very positive one, which would say when you're arriving into Heathrow, 98% take the Heathrow Express into town rather than a cab. It's less expensive and it's quicker, and people find it a good experience. Follow these arrows on your mapping application to take you from your arrival baggage claim straight to the terminal. So that kind of personalization and innovation could create a stickier application and create more in-channel compliance. This idea of integrated solutions is also growing rapidly. So what we mean by this is very often you'll have a separate booking tool. Then you'll have a travel agency or travel management company. You might have a corporate card. You might also have risk management, and you could even have an expense system. So those five elements may be independent, or we're starting to see integrated solutions rise. Not some with all five, but some with combinations of those five. And so the challenge is that sounds like a really terrific thing, but what market is applicable for? And very often, sophisticated, multinational, large scale enterprise type customers don't have that integrated beyond maybe two and potentially three of those elements. So sometimes that can fall apart. The other challenge is If you choose to source and integrate that way, are all five of those the very best at what they do? Are they the best TMC, the best booking tool for that country or that region, the best charge card, the best risk management, or the best expense? Probably not the best, but are they good enough? So the trade-off between the best and acceptable. And then the other challenge is ERP solutions are very sticky. They're large scale, they're generally millions and millions of dollars. They're integrated in not only tax, but financial systems. And if they offer complementary TMCs or booking tools or those kind of things, often they're sticky and it's hard to displace those in the event you might want to. But four very easy applications that we can go from point A to where we think things might be in 2024 and beyond. First is they're extremely attractive to the smaller market. I mean, this is simple. It's easy to implement. It's one supplier, it's done. So it might not be best in class, best of breed, best in country or region, but it might be enough. So many applications are very attractive in this particular space. And I think the market will continue to grow. So we'll see more and more integrated solutions rise. We have to talk a little bit about blockchain. A few of the challenges. It's got minimal adoption in the travel industry. Um, opacity is monetized. And what we mean by that is if you can't see into a system, then you have by default a fortress or a siloed set of information. And that's the way many, many organizations make money. In fact, many of you on this call, your organizations make money from that. You sell information, advice, and counsel. And so you don't want that to be freely available, widely available to the public. So siloed information has generally been monetized. You can get a premium for that. The other challenge with blockchain is who owns the booking and how can we actually serve the booking? And there's been a couple of applications that have been pretty public, as most of you have probably seen. Business Travel News awarded its Travel Managers of the Year for their innovation with blockchain and with a couple of providers. And what they shared in their case studies and in their written articles is that they were able to disintermediate a couple of things. Airline distribution fees. Because they did a direct booking through a new online booking application, they were able to then take it out of the GDS. So they didn't have distribution fees there. Secondarily, they linked it to a payment system that disintermediated the card fees, the merchant fees. So by doing those two things, they're taking those out of the normal system and saying, because there's not a GDS, we don't have those fees to pay. There's not a card because we're paying in a different way. So all of those fees have gone down. So there's an opportunity to disintermediate fees. And then there could be an improved experience. So in this example, they were able to sell combinations of bundles that were pre-approved. And as a result of that, travelers were able to very simply purchase Wi-Fi, purchase a preferred seat, purchase an early boarding, something like that, that perhaps they wouldn't have been enabled in a EDIFACT channel. So as a result of the blockchain, they were able to do that kind of experience. And in this case of the example of Business Travel News Travel Manager of the Year, because that airline ticket was already on the blockchain, purchased within policy, that's the only thing allowed, then you were able to process it, pay for it. You didn't need an expense report. It's an authorized transaction, so it doesn't even go through. So as a result of that, you can see an expense report. Neil rightly shared that we see payment probably the biggest growth area because it's one of the pain points today, but it will certainly continue to connect not only in the airspace, but as soon as the hotel community can get to it in ground, we'll see it there as well. Labor challenges continue. Now, I appreciate the chat, George. Always great to hear from you that you've solved it, and I'm pleased for Fox World to have done that. But that may not be indicative, certainly from what we hear. And what we hear is that, it's a tough labor market. There are very few, as you've seen, unemployment is falling. Therefore, you have more employed. Therefore, the labor pool is smaller. And in addition to that, many of the perks that used to come with the travel industry, those have gone away. So the salaries are rising because of inflation and because of competitive pressures. In addition to that, some of the perks have gone away, so attracting and retaining talent can get tough. And what we've heard over and over is that, you know, some of the more experienced and senior people that quote were, I was tired of the roller coaster. You know, travel's good, things are great, then there's a travel freeze or cut, and you know, I'm worried about my job. So many people left the industry just from the roller coaster effect. However, there are some applications here, and they're kind of interesting when you take them to a tertiary level. The first application is that we've kind of solved the simple ones. We've solved that with booking tools, with point to point. AI will continue to solve some of those. But perhaps this recommended itinerary will solve some of those. But those are more simple. So what's left is the more difficult. And thinking that through a little bit, that means you need a higher skill set. And that means you need those people who may not have a higher skill set because they may not be around. So even though we're solving with technology, what remains could be more expensive and more complex. And that's what we mean by the low value we can solve with technology, but what remains becomes more complicated, takes more time, involves more expense, and therefore hopefully can do a little better job for us. And so our application for labor is to continue to look at technological solutions that might help us solve. And our last and 10th item to share is integrated meeting and transient. Now, I do chuckle. For those of you that have done this a while, you'll recall from just about every large scale meeting you've attended, quote, meetings and transient merged is the next big thing. And we've heard that for a lot of years. However, why Goldspring is sharing this is because we're getting asked to include this more and more regularly in sourcing exercises. So I want to look at transient TMCs, but I want meetings and I want those integrated in my sourcing strategy and my execution strategy. So some challenges. We've had ferocious growth in small and simple meetings this year. And I would envision that most of you on this call have seen that as well. So a lot of growth, and that's terrific. But often the meetings management gets siloed. And when it's siloed, you generally have less ability to integrate and create synergies. It also very often has different stakeholders. For example, the head of sales, global head of sales, may prefer to have his or her assistant do the meeting because the assistant has done a terrific job, knows exactly how I like it. He's a great support to me. I don't want it to go out to a third party. We understand those kind of complexities. Marketing, I own this budget, so why would I let anyone else have it? We hear those things. However, there are three very important applications that can be very useful. The first is by linking them and integrating them, you have better insights and visibility. You're able to see not only the transient, but the meetings and look for some synergies and maybe some applications that can help you with better supplier management and maybe rationalization of suppliers. So maybe you're doing meetings with 45 different type of organizations or hoteliers, and maybe there's a way to look at some synergy there and merge it in with transient. And we don't think sometimes we miss duty of care when there's not an airline ticket involved. So maybe the meeting is a driving meeting for a local group. And maybe duty of care gets completely left out because of that. If we integrate them, we would be able to see those kind of things. So all of these looking forward remind us of what I think was a pretty interesting question that was posed back in the 50s. And the question that was posed very simply, why can't children read? And this question was posed in 1954 by a Pulitzer Prize winning author named John Hershey. And he sort of threw it out to the public. And Life magazine decided to answer via a written article. And they came up with these four opinions why children couldn't read. One, books were terribly boring. And children should want to read. They're competing with playground time and lots of other things they could be doing other than reading. And because they're boring, you've got to make them more interesting and more entertaining. So again, this question was sort of put out to the American public in 1954. And one editor said, I think I might know, but I would challenge. let's go out to the authors of these kind of books and let's ask them two criteria here. Write something that first graders would really be engaged with and make it simple. Use a vocabulary list of 300 accepted words, words that are easy to understand, easy to learn. And so with that, they did get one author who said, I'll agree, but you have to give me two words that rhyme. And if it makes sense to me as the author, I get to call it that. So with that, I'm sure you're already ahead of me, but The Cat in the Hat was written by Dr. Seuss. It only has 236 unique words. It's been called the biggest event in children reading for centuries. John Hersey, who was the author who asked the question, said it's a masterpiece and it's a gift to the art of reading. And Dr. Seuss himself said it's the book I'm proudest of. It proved to millions of kids that reading is not a disagreeable task. And while that's a fun story about reading, it does give us two lessons that are completely applicable to all of these changes that Neil and I are sharing and looking forward. And the first is that intelligence follows interest. So in this cat in the hat example, and also the 10 trends we're looking for, it's been quoted, I can be very dumb about things I don't care about, and I can be extremely smart about the things I do care about. And this is why the task was to make children's books more interesting. It's also the task of Goldspring to share with you what's coming, because if we can spark your interest, then your intelligence will follow. And the second one, which is also very illustrative, is constraints boost creativity. So Dr. Seuss used only 36 unique words. But following this, Dr. Seuss's publisher bet Dr. Seuss $50 he couldn't write a book using only 50 unique words. And of course, you know, that book was called Green Eggs and Ham and went on to sell more than 8 million copies and the best-selling children's book of all time. And if authors don't inspire you and AI with rap lyrics, let's talk about rock musicians. Jack White, the lead singer of the White Stripes and his own materials, said constraints make you creative. Telling yourself you have all the time in the world, all the money in the world, all the colors in the palette, anything you want, that just kills creativity. And with that, we think we have shown you a number of constraints, specifically 10, that will move us forward as we go forward in the industry. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for being a part of this. Grateful for your contributions throughout the years, and we hope that you have a really terrific holiday and festive season. Thanks for all.